The researchers' interest in this topic developed through repeated observation of a persistent tension in instructional settings. Writing support programs are widely implemented. Students often report increased confidence after participating, and institutions continue to allocate time and resources to these services. Yet, despite this investment, it is not always clear whether students who receive writing support actually demonstrate stronger writing performance than students who do not. This disconnect between assumed benefit and demonstrable outcomes represents a meaningful phenomenon in educational practice and raises a central, so what question? If writing support programs are intended to improve writing performance, evidence of that improvement should be visible in students' writing outcomes. This tension prompted closer examination of the existing literature on instructional supports and writing achievement. Prior research frequently investigates whether participation in writing programs is associated with higher writing scores. Some studies report that students who receive targeted writing support outperform their peers, while others find little or no difference between supported and unsupported students. These mixed findings suggest that conclusions about program effectiveness may depend on how student groups are defined, how writing performance is measured, and how comparisons are structured. Much of the existing literature relies on comparisons between distinct groups of students, such as those who participate in a program and those who do not. These studies focus on between-group differences rather than change within individuals. This approach is appropriate when the research interest centers on whether different groups demonstrate different outcomes at a given point in time. However, it requires careful alignment between the research question, the structure of the data, and the analytic method used to evaluate group differences. This study is grounded in social constructivist learning theory, which emphasizes that learning develops through guided practice, feedback, and interaction with more knowledgeable others. Within this framework, writing improvement is expected to occur when students receive structured support that helps them revise, reflect, and apply feedback to their work. Writing support programs are explicitly designed around these principles by providing individualized coaching and targeted feedback. As a result, social constructivist learning theory supports the expectation that students who participate in a writing support program will demonstrate higher mean writing scores than students who do not participate. As a result, this framework supports the expectation that students who participate in a writing support program will demonstrate higher mean writing scores than students who do not participate. The literature gap addressed in this study centers on determining whether two independent groups of students differ in writing performance. The gap does not focus on how students' writing changes over time, nor does it ask whether writing scores can be predicted from other variables. Instead, it asks whether membership in one group versus another is associated with a difference in mean writing scores. Because the outcome of interest is numeric and the goal is to compare group means, the problem is inherently quantitative in nature. Once a quantitative approach is established, the specific type of quantitative question becomes central. The gap does not call for regression, which would focus on prediction or explanation of variance. It does not call for correlation, which would examine relationship between two numeric variables. It also does not call for a paired or repeated measures analysis, because the students in one group are not the same students in the other group. Instead, the gap calls for a comparison of average writing performance between two separate, unrelated groups of students. This framing clearly signals a statistically significant difference question focused on group means. The structure of the data further clarifies the analytic choice. Each student contributes one writing score, and each student belongs to only one group. No student appears in both groups. Because the scores are independent and the groups are unrelated, analyses designed for paired or repeated measurements would be inappropriate. The independence of observations is fundamental to the logic of the analysis and distinguishes this design from studies of within-student change. Taken together, these considerations lead directly to the selection of an independent samples t-test. This analysis is specifically designed to compare the mean scores of two independent groups on a numeric outcome, and to determine whether the observed difference in group means is unlikely to be due to chance alone. Based on this reasoning, the purpose of this comparative quantitative study was to examine whether students' writing performance differed between two independent instructional groups. Using a comparative design, the study employed an independent samples t-test to determine whether there was a statistically significant difference in mean writing scores between students who participated in a writing support program and students who did not. Guided by this purpose, the study addressed the following research question. Is there a statistically significant difference in mean writing scores between students who participated in a writing support program and students who did not participate? In this study, the independent variable was writing support program participation, defined as two independent groups of students, those who participated and those who did not. The dependent variable was writing performance, measured as a numeric writing assessment score. The null hypothesis stated that there is no statistically significant difference in mean writing scores between the two groups of students. The alternative hypothesis stated that there is a statistically significant difference in mean writing scores between students who participated in the writing support program and those who did not. The sample consisted of two independent groups of students. Group 1 included 38 students who participated in the writing support program, and Group 2 included 36 students who did not participate. Each student completed the same standardized writing assessment, and writing scores were derived using a consistent scoring rubric across both groups. Before interpreting results, it is important to consider the assumptions underlying the independent samples t-test. Observations must be independent, meaning each student contributes only one score and belongs to only one group. The outcome variable must be numeric and measured consistently across groups. The groups must be truly independent, with no overlap in membership. Writing scores should be approximately normally distributed within each group, meaning most scores cluster around the average without extreme distortion. Finally, variability in writing scores should be reasonably similar across groups, so that one group does not display substantially greater spread than the other. These assumptions support fair and interpretable group comparisons. Descriptive statistics indicated that students who participated in the writing support program demonstrated higher average writing scores than students who did not participate. The mean writing score for the program group was 80.3 with a standard deviation of 8.7, while the mean writing score for the non-participation group was 75.1 with a standard deviation of 9.5. These descriptive results suggest a difference in average writing performance between groups, but descriptive statistics alone cannot determine whether this difference reflects more than random variation. Results of the independent samples t-test indicated that the difference in mean writing scores between the two groups was statistically significant. The test statistic was 2.45 with 72 degrees of freedom, and the probability value was 0.017. In practical terms, this means the observed difference in average writing scores between the groups is unlikely to have occurred by chance alone. Accordingly, the null hypothesis was rejected. Rejecting the null hypothesis directly answers the research question. The findings indicate that students who participated in the writing support program demonstrated significantly different writing performance than students who did not participate. Because each student contributed only one score and belonged to only one group, the results reflect differences between groups rather than improvement within individuals. This distinction is essential for interpreting what the findings do and do not represent. Statistical significance alone does not convey the magnitude or practical importance of the observed difference. To address this, effect size was examined using Cohen's d. The effect size value of 0.57 represents a moderate effect. In practical terms, this indicates that the difference between group averages is noticeable rather than trivial. Although there is still overlap between the two groups, a moderate effect suggests that students in the writing support program tended, on average, to demonstrate stronger writing performance than students who did not participate. The practical meaning of this difference is further clarified by the confidence interval for the mean difference. The 95% confidence interval ranged from 0.9 to 9.5 points, indicating that the true difference in average writing scores between the two groups is likely to fall within this range. The direction of these findings is consistent with the social constructivist learning theory, guiding the study. As expected within a framework that emphasizes guided practice and targeted feedback, Students who participated in the writing support program demonstrated higher writing scores than students who did not participate. This alignment strengthens confidence that the observed group difference reflects theoretically meaningful patterns, rather than a purely statistical artifact. The trustworthiness of these findings is supported by alignment among the research problem, theoretical framework, literature gap, purpose statement, research question, and analytic approach. At the same time, the limitations of the study shape how the findings should be interpreted. Because students were not randomly assigned to groups, the results support an association between program participation and writing performance, but do not justify causal conclusions. Pre-existing differences between students who chose to participate and those who did not may have influenced the observed outcomes. Additional limitations should be considered. The findings are limited to the specific sample and institutional context examined, and may not generalize to other settings or student populations. Differences in instructional practices, student characteristics, or program implementation could lead to different results elsewhere. Considerations of power and robustness further contextualize the findings. With reasonably balanced group sizes, the study had sufficient power to detect a moderate difference in writing performance. The independent samples t-test is generally robust to modest violations of assumptions. However, substantial differences in group variability or extreme outliers could influence results. There was no indication that the findings were driven by a small number of extreme cases, though this remains an important consideration in group comparison research. Because only 2 groups were compared, no post hoc tests were required. Post hoc analyses are used when 3 or more groups are examined, which was not the case in this study. If additional groups had been included, a different analytic approach would have been necessary. In summary, this quantitative study addressed a meaningful problem in educational practice by examining whether writing performance differed between 2 independent groups of students. Guided by social constructivist learning theory, and using an independent samples t-test aligned with the research question and design, the study found a statistically significant and moderately sized difference in writing scores. While causal conclusions cannot be drawn, the findings provide evidence that participation in a writing support program is associated with higher writing performance and illustrate how independent samples t-tests are used to evaluate group differences in educational research.